Forget chasing high-cap tech stocks or, diving into crypto. If you want to know where the global economy is heading, apparently you shouldn't be looking at the ticker tape.
No, not at all. You should be looking
Right.
inside your icebox.
It sounds like a joke, but it's absolutely real. We're talking about the birth of a major economic force built on what's playfully, or maybe terrifyingly, called fridge peeping.
And this idea that the future of multi-billion-dollar markets is being predicted by what's sitting next to your milk carton, well, it's rapidly being codified into actual technology architecture. It's happening right now.
Exactly. I mean, we heard this great anecdote about an investment firm founder, a guy named Tassos Stassopoulos.
Oh, yeah, the fridge-obsessed investor.
That's the one. He has literally pioneered this investment strategy where he travels the world, peering into refrigerators in people's homes to predict where global diets and, the economy that follow them will go next.
He's turning these tiny micro-consumption habits into huge macroeconomic signals. It's fascinating.
It is. And our mission in this deep dive is to move past that anecdote and really unpack the hard reality of this trend. We're going to explore how modern technology, specifically computer vision and AI, is systematically turning your home inventory into this highly valuable proprietary market intelligence.
Right. And our sources for this, they detailed the precise technical architecture, the very sharp economics driving this whole gold rush, and, of course, the massive regulatory risks that come with gaining this kind of granular, individualized data directly from inside your home.
We're moving so far beyond just knowing what you bought at the checkout line.
Yeah.
Now we have the capacity to know when you consumed it, how much of it is left.
And even when it's about to spoil.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core question for you, the listener. How incredibly valuable, in hard monetary terms, is the data about your specific brand of butter or your tendency to waste dairy?
And maybe more importantly, what's the ultimate cost if you trade that intimate, constant stream of domestic privacy for the promised convenience of a smart home?
Okay, let's unpack all of this. I want to start with the foundational economic driver. Why on earth is the refrigerator suddenly the most valuable data center in the world?
Well, we're sitting at what you could call a critical inflection point for the consumer packaged goods industry, that's CPG, and for retail as a whole.
CPG, so we're talking about the big brands, those that make the toothpaste, the chips, the detergent.
Exactly. For decades, their business model has been hampered by this massive, really debilitating data challenge. They manufacture the products, but they don't sell them directly to you. They sell them to the retailer.
So their entire understanding of who their customer is and how they behave, it's all filtered through a middleman, right?
Precisely. They rely almost entirely on aggregated retail transaction records. It's classic third-party data. So if Kellogg's sells, say, 1,000 boxes of cereal through a national chain,
They just know 1,000 boxes were sold.
they know 1,000 boxes were sold. They don't know the demographic profile of the buyers, where those boxes went, or, and this is the critical part, how quickly that cereal was actually consumed once it crossed the consumer's threshold.
That just sounds like an enormous blind spot. I mean, they're spending billions on advertising, but they had this huge gap between the point of sale and the actual point of consumption. They never truly know if their product is effective in the actual messy, lived reality of a kitchen.
It's the defining constraint for CPG marketing. The difficulty in scaling direct personalized data acquisition has cost them untold billions in, inefficient promotions and misallocated product development funds.
But the analysis of what's inside a refrigerator using modern tech, it completely bypasses that constraint.
It does. So the goal is to shift from that generic third-party data to something proprietary.
Something they own.
Absolutely. The new focus is entirely on acquiring, and this is the key phrase, proprietary, personalized, first-party consumption data at scale.
It sounds like bypass surgery for the whole CPG data problem.
That's a great way to put it. It allows them to leapfrog the aggregated retail data and own the most valuable insight of all, the intimate behavior of the household after the purchase has been made.
Okay, that phrase, proprietary, personalized, first-party data, that's clearly the economic driver. But let's clarify the economics here a bit more. We're not just talking about knowing what product is in the fridge, are we? We're talking about its entire life cycle.
Correct. The core driver isn't just the transactional volume. It's the capacity to acquire this personalized data stream and track the product's disposition.
It's fate, basically.
Exactly. A single piece of software that tracks the life cycle of every product in your fridge, from full to empty, or from fresh to spoiled, that is exponentially more valuable than the simple point-of-sale data that only captures the initial transaction.
Can you give us a concrete example of that? What's
That-
the value difference?
Certainly. Consider the difference between knowing a household bought a 4-pack of yogurt and knowing that they opened one, left it partially eaten for 4 days, and then threw 3 of the 4 tubs away before the stated expiration date because they just bought too much.
Wow. That latter piece of information is gold, isn't it?
It's absolute gold. It informs logistics. Maybe the 4-pack is too large. It informs packaging size. Maybe they need individual portion seals. And it informs marketing strategy. Target this household with smaller sizes or high urgency promotions.
And if you know exactly when consumers are wasting a specific product size, both the retailers and the CPG brands can adjust their entire supply chain.
And that's the kind of micro-level insight that someone like Tassos Stassopoulos leverages when he does his manual fridge peeping to predict these macro trends. The big institutions are just figuring out how to automate that exact insight.
So the entire economy of this hinges on that data acquisition capacity.
Yeah.
But getting that kind of intimacy, it requires companies to breach the boundary of the kitchen. And our sources say they're pursuing 2 very different technological paths to do it.
They are, which leads us straight into the dual modalities of data acquisition.
Right. And as you said earlier, the choice between these 2 paths really determines the operational cost, the speed of deployment, and critically, the level of regulatory and trust risk the company is willing to take on.
Let's start with modality A, the IoT smart fridge data. This is the passive approach.
This is the sci-fi vision, right? The fridge that watches you back. What's the mechanism here?
The mechanism is passive data capture. It uses internal cameras and a whole suite of sensors that are built directly into the appliance. The user buys the expensive fridge, plugs it in, connects it to the network, and the data just starts flowing.
Continuously.
In real time, 254/7, with zero effort required from the user.
For an analyst trying to capture continuous inventory metrics like, when was the milk glass moved? Or what's the average distance between the butter and the cheese? This continuous, high-fidelity data flow seems like the dream model.
From a purely technical perspective, it is the highest fidelity, no question. However, the costs and the risks are enormous, and they're centered entirely around this perception of surveillance and consumer trust.
And we know organizations like Consumer Reports have been warning about this.
They have. They've strongly warned that these internet-connected appliances are highly vulnerable to hacking, which compromises not just the appliance data, but potentially your entire home network.
And this passive collection is exactly what fuels the consumer's perception of unwarranted surveillance, which, as we've said, is an existential threat to this whole business model.
Absolutely. For many consumers, the convenience just doesn't override the fear of being constantly watched and monitored. We know that the passive collection of intimate data about household eating habits and routines is widely perceived as invasive.
People are just worried about a device that's always on and always looking.
Of course. And we have specific data on the sheer volume of this data transmission, don't we?
We do. How much information is actually leaving the home network just from owning one of these smart appliances?
The figures are they're staggering, especially when you consider the data is just monitoring usage. Our sources indicated that smart appliances, even when they're used relatively infrequently, shared between 3.4 megabytes and 19 megabytes of usage data back to the manufacturer.
Every single week.
Every week.
That's a huge range. But let's just take the high end for a second. 19 megabytes a week just for usage data? What does that even mean?
Well, in terms of raw text, that's the equivalent of 135,000 text messages being sent weekly back to the manufacturer.
Wow.
And this data, it includes personal identifiers like your zip code, your phone number, date of birth, and highly accurate geolocation via the user's smartphone connection. The sheer volume and intimacy of this is why Modality A carries such a huge regulatory and consumer trust liability.
Plus, there's another problem. If CPG companies rely only on this, their data set is going to be incredibly skewed, isn't it?
Heavily skewed. It'll be skewed toward the very small percentage of consumers who can afford a $4,000 smart appliance. That is not a representative sample if you're a mass market brand like General Mills.
That's a crucial point. If your goal is truly mass market trend identification, limiting your data pool to the top-tier wealth quintiles basically defeats the entire purpose. So if the passive IoT approach has all that risk and all that bias, I'm assuming the industry has found a more palatable plan B.
They have. And that leads us directly to modality B, crowdsourced mobile data, the active approach.
This one flips the trust model on its head.
It does. It relies on explicit consent and user action.
So the mechanism here is consumer participation in exchange for some kind of incentive. You, the consumer, you actively upload images of your fridge contents, or maybe you use a scanning app on your phone.
Exactly. It leverages established market research principles, but just scales them up using mobile technology. The consumer performs a specific, limited action uploading a picture, and they get a direct incentive. Maybe a gift card, a coupon, loyalty points, something like that.
This approach seems to solve the three major problems of modality A all at once. You've got lower deployment costs, faster rollout, and a much better way to manage explicit consent because the user is opting in for a very defined task.
And most critically, it fixes the bias problem. While relying on smart fridge sales inherently skews towards high-income early adopters, crowdsourcing, because it relies on mobile apps, is a low-cost, rapid method that can overcome socioeconomic and geographical barriers all over the world.
That strategic advantage, the ability to build a truly representative data set, that seems key. And our sources have this fascinating real-world example of how mobile crowdsourcing fixed a massive socioeconomic bias in data collection in Bangladesh.
This is a perfect illustration of the power of modality B. So UNICEF used a mobile-based platform called U-Report, which operates over low-cost channels like SMS, WhatsApp, and Viber.
So things people already have on their phones.
Right, and they combined it with a proprietary tool called the equity tool methodology. Initially, when they recruited for their surveys, it was heavily skewed toward the top 2 wealth quintiles. Something like 79% of the initial respondents were from more affluent backgrounds.
Which is the natural digital skew we see everywhere, right? People with better connectivity and smartphones tend to be overrepresented.
Exactly. But by integrating the equity tool, which is a standardized short survey used to accurately place users into national wealth quintiles, they could analyze the results and see the significant bias instantly. The initial sample had an equity index score of only 53 out of 100.
Meaning it was not representative of the national population at all.
Not even close. So what do? They intentionally adjusted their recruitment outreach and their targeting to prioritize users from the lower wealth quintiles using the mobile platform's broad reach.
So they actively used the crowdsourcing tool to fix the bias in the crowd.
They did. By combining U-Report's accessibility with the equity tool's classification power, they were able to create an equitably weighted, random subsample of respondents across all 5 wealth quintiles.
And what was the end result?
They moved the final sampling pool to an equity index of 98 out of 100.
Wow. That's incredible.
It proves that mobile crowdsourcing can access diverse demographics, including the poorest quintiles, which makes the resulting data set vastly more valuable for mass-market CPG trend analysis than data collected only from the wealthy owners of smart refrigerators.
That is a fundamental business-to-business value proposition. Your data is useful because it is representative. But, whether that data comes from a passive smart fridge or an active mobile upload, it all lands in the same raw state.
Yeah.
A chaotic, messy image of food inside a dark box. Getting from that picture to actionable market data requires a really complex technological stack.
And this is the core technological mountain that the industry has to climb. We need to talk about computer vision, or CV. In structured retail environments, CV is mature. It operates at near-perfect accuracy. You can think of automated checkout systems like Mashgin, which uses multiple 3D cameras to get over 99.99% accuracy in identifying items.
Or even shelf-scanning robots in stores. The items are neat, uniformly packaged, clearly oriented. A store shelf is predictable because a human organized it.
Correct. A domestic refrigerator, however, is a hostile environment for an AI. It is, to use the source's term, chaotic and highly variable.
I can confirm that about my own fridge.
Right. Items are placed randomly, they're often piled on top of each other, they're occluded, hidden, and generally in poor lighting. Successfully teaching a machine to identify, say, a half-used container of butter sitting behind a carton of eggs requires an immense volume of specialized, manually annotated training data.
So what's the specific architecture that allows an AI to handle that kind of chaos?
The underlying architecture relies on deep learning, specifically convolutional neural networks, or CNNs, which are essential for any kind of visual processing. These networks learn what are called hierarchical features.
Okay, what does that mean in simple terms?
It means the lower layers of the network might recognize very basic things like shapes or textures or a distinct color gradient. Then the higher layers combine those simple features to learn more complex concepts, like recognizing the specific label font on a brand of pickle jar, even if half of the jar is hidden in shadow.
So Bill's understanding layer by layer.
Oh,
And the most sophisticated systems, they go beyond just basic CNNs, right?
they do. Our sources point specifically to advanced object detection systems, like something called faster RCNN, which typically uses a robust backbone like ResNet 101.
Okay, that's a lot of jargon. Let's break that down.
Okay, the key distinction here is the R that stands for region. A standard CNN looks at an image as a whole, but a region-based CNN, or RCNN, is much better at finding objects in cluttered or blocked spaces because it first identifies potential regions of interest and then applies a classification.
So it's not trying to understand the whole messy picture at once. It's looking for things that look like objects first.
Exactly. That makes it highly effective for the chaotic refrigerator environment. The 101 in ResNet 101 just refers to the depth of the network. It has 101 layers of analysis, which adds tremendous accuracy when you're dealing with complex visual data.
And I'm guessing they aren't building this from scratch for every project. Where do they start?
They start with massive generalized datasets. These models are typically pre-trained on foundational datasets, something like the COSIO 2017 dataset, which contains 2.5 million labeled instances across hundreds of thousands of images. This gives the model a sort of generalized understanding of the world.
A baseline.
A baseline, yes. Then they spend fortunes fine-tuning it for the very specific, chaotic, and proprietary task of recognizing fridge content at 99% plus accuracy.
And that fine-tuning process, that seems to be the real competitive barrier, and it requires human labor at a massive scale.
It absolutely does. This takes us back to annotation. That's the act of meticulously labeling the visual data. To train these high-accuracy systems, you need specialized crowdsourcing platforms to perform incredibly complex tasks.
Like what? What are these human annotators doing?
They are drawing precise bounding boxes around every single object in that chaotic image, and then they're associating intricate metadata with each box.
And what kind of metadata are they associating beyond just, carton of milk?
It's the consumption metadata that provides all the value. The brand name, the specific type of packaging, the expiration date if it's visible on the label, and most critically, its current state of use, is the milk carton full, half full, or nearly empty.
Wow. That level of complexity means that the ability to collect and manage this proprietary labeled visual data set, that's the single most defensible competitive barrier in this whole economy.
Without a doubt. The largest, most accurate labeled data set of messy fridge contents is what truly determines who can offer the most reliable data feeds to the CPG brands.
And the sources show how difficult this really is, right?
They do. In one specific technical study, researchers used that same faster RCNN with ResNet 101 to detect just 4 common items: bell pepper, tomato, carrot, and butter.
Okay, pretty simple.
You'd think. But they found that when using low-quality, poorly lit images from one domestic fridge, the model repeatedly mixed up the red bell pepper and the tomato because of the similarities in color and shape.
Which just demonstrates that even with a state-of-the-art 101-layer deep neural network, the foundational input, the quality, and the diversity of the labeled image data is paramount. If your training data is low quality, the model can't generalize, especially when dealing with occlusion, when one item blocks another, which is the norm in an overflowing fridge.
And now they're pushing the technology even further. They aren't just trying to figure out what you have, they're trying to figure out if it's still good.
Okay, so this requires integrating multiple sensor types to predict spoilage. Let's talk about that, advanced food spoilage detection. The goal here is identifying decay before it's visible to the human eye. How are they doing that?
It moves beyond visual classification and into chemical analysis. The most sophisticated refrigerators are deploying chemical sensors throughout the storage areas, even in specialized drawers like crispers, to detect what are called volatile organic compounds, or VOCs.
The chemicals that are released during decomposition.
Precisely.
So what are the primary VOCs they're looking for, the ones that signal spoilage?
There are 4 key categories they monitor. First is ethylene. This is a plant hormone that signals ripening, but its presence can accelerate the spoilage of other sensitive produce around it.
Right, the one bad apple effect.
That's it, exactly. Second, they detect alcohols and acetic acid, which are both critical byproducts of fermentation and oxidation in spoiled food.
So the system is literally smelling the onset of chemical rancidity or fermentation long before a human ever would.
Exactly. And the fourth category is volatile aldehydes and ketones, which are clear chemical signatures of rancidity, particularly in fats and oils. The system just monitors the concentration of these chemicals against a set threshold.
And I recall reading the threshold isn't static, right? The system is smart enough to adjust its own definition of spoiled.
It is. The spoilage identification application will dynamically adjust the necessary chemical threshold based on the quantity of the food item present. If you have a massive wedge of cheese, the acceptable chemical threshold is higher than if you only have a tiny exposed sliver of that same cheese.
Less food means a lower threshold for spoilage. That's incredibly precise engineering. But visual cameras are still required for the human-friendly output, right? How are visible and infrared cameras contributing?
They're critical for visual confirmation and for non-chemical analysis. Visible spectrum and infrared cameras capture images that are constantly being compared against vast image models of spoiled food items, models of mold growth, bruising, oxidation, and so on.
And what specific advantage does infrared technology offer over a standard color camera?
Infrared cameras are essential for detecting specific temperature gradients that signal decay activity. Think about a piece of produce. A deep bruise might register as a localized temperature difference because the tissue is breaking down.
That's amazing.
Even more fascinating, areas where mold or bacteria are actively growing, metabolizing the food, they may appear slightly hotter than the surrounding area because of their digestive activity. The system uses these thermal signatures, which are indelible to our eyes, to pinpoint the item and verify the chemical readings.
It's essentially using the food's temperature and its chemical signature to identify decay. Once that spoilage is confirmed, the technology has to translate that into a usable recommendation.
It does. If the chemical or image threshold is exceeded, the system identifies the spoiled item, often using the same CV model that identified it in the first place, and then it sends an automated response. This notification goes to the user's mobile device or the fridge display.
And it makes it easy to find, right?
To make it maximally useful, yes. The notification can include a modified image with the bad item highlighted, a colored box around the rotten lettuce, for example, to help you find it in the back of your typical messy fridge.
Okay, so from a purely technical and a moral standpoint addressing food waste, this technology is phenomenal. But let's circle back to the central theme here. Why are companies investing billions into this elaborate, intimate inventory tracking? What is the ultimate economic payoff?
The payoff lies in the sophisticated monetization of these consumption patterns. The best model is a licensing model. The objective is to create a single high-fidelity data asset that can be packaged and sold to multiple diverse stakeholders, which maximizes the revenue for the data owner.
So let's break down those stakeholders. First, the CPG companies, the manufacturers. They're the primary purchasers of this personalized consumption data. What specific business outcomes are they trying to achieve?
Well, they're driven by some massive competitive needs. First, they need to identify high-performing versus underperforming products across regions and time periods much, much faster than retail data allows. This lets them allocate marketing and production resources almost instantly.
And then there's trend identification.
Exactly. Acquiring that granular insight into emerging consumer preferences allows them to optimize product offerings, packaging sizes, ingredients, basically to meet evolving demands before their competitors can even catch up.
And the biggest driver of all has to be marketing efficiency. If they know exactly which demographics are consuming their product, or more importantly, consuming a competitor's product, they can laser target their advertising spend.
Absolutely. The ultimate goal is improving marketing return on investment, or ROI, through these highly targeted, personalized campaigns. If a brand sees a high-value customer profile consistently using a specific competitive product, and they see that customer is running low,
They know the precise moment and the precise channel to hit that user with a tailored incentive to switch brands.
you've got it. It completely eliminates the scattershot approach of traditional mass advertising.
Okay, so that's CPG. Now let's consider the retailers, the grocery stores themselves. Their drivers seem to be less about personalized marketing and more about solving immediate logistical and financial pain points.
That's right. Retailers, especially those dealing with fresh goods, produce, meat, dairy, they're focused on aggregated demand signals for supply chain stability. The primary drivers are accurate demand forecasting and inventory planning, which is existential for perishable items. Fresh food spoilage costs the retail industry billions every year.
Our sources indicate this focus on fresh goods is absolutely critical. Overestimating your safety stock for perishable items is just incredibly expensive.
It can completely obliterate your margins. As one source noted, overestimating safety stock, particularly in fresh categories, can just kill your inventory turns and make your inventory very inefficient. It also creates waste before the product even gets to the shelf.
So if retailers know that, say, 30% of their customer base consistently finishes a specific item in 6 days instead of 8, they can adjust their orders and stock cycles with military precision.
And that allows them to drastically reduce waste and spoilage risk, a major expense, and optimize their pricing strategies based on these fine-tuned demand signals. You're essentially achieving dynamic pricing based on a real-time understanding of neighborhood consumption.
And this brings us right back to the investment philosophy of Tassos Stassopoulos. He visits homes to predict where consumer diets are shifting globally, for example, from red meat to plant-based alternatives.
Right. And the aggregated data from thousands of fridges allows institutional investors and CPG companies to see that same shift happening in real time, which justifies investments or divestments in entire product categories.
So the value of the data is confirmed by these primary buyers. But the sources identify a third, highly lucrative and almost surprising, competitive access for this data: health tech companies.
This creates an entirely new layer of competition and value. Inventory data, knowing precisely what specific food items are available and what's being consumed, provides highly valuable, precise insight into metrics like dietary adherence, nutrient intake, and even sophisticated obesity risk scores.
Because if the system can constantly calculate your, quote, obesogenic score based on the ratio of high-fat, high-sugar items versus healthy produce in your fridge,
then, health tech companies, including personalized nutrition providers, preventative health organizations, and even players in the insurance market, they become highly motivated, high-paying buyers.
so they want to license this data.
They want to license the inventory data to fuel their own personalized recommendation algorithms, their remote patient monitoring platforms, and their risk assessment models. This segment creates direct competition with traditional CPG analysts and retailers for that intimate data stream, which significantly increases its overall value.
The economic opportunity is clearly massive and diverse. But the second this technology crosses the threshold into the home and starts cataloging our diets, we hit this immense wall of regulatory and ethical roadblocks. This has to be the existential threat to the viability of the entire business model.
It is. And the central, unavoidable threat is that perception of unwarranted surveillance. As the sources note, the refrigerator itself already functions as an important agent in the moral narrative of food waste, by providing a space where our food becomes waste and influencing people's ethical conduct.
That's the intrusiveness paradox you mentioned earlier. The technology is often justified by this moral imperative to reduce household food waste, which is a pivotal ethical challenge globally. But that moral goal is being achieved through constant monitoring.
And that ethical goal does not, under any circumstance, grant immunity from strict data protection laws. The high data transfer volume we discussed, the equivalent of 135,000 text messages weekly, is evidence of the constant monitoring that fuels the surveillance perception and directly triggers regulatory scrutiny.
And the moment that dietary data is collected, it immediately enters a highly regulated space because of its potential health correlation. It's not just simple marketing data anymore.
Exactly. Data related to dietary choices, especially when it's used to calculate things like obesogenic scores or track ingredients relevant to severe allergies or medical conditions, can be correlated with sensitive personal health status.
And that classification triggers the heightened requirements under major regimes like GDPR in Europe and the CCPA in California.
It does. You can't treat this data with the same casualness as, transactional history. It demands significantly more rigorous protection.
So the companies need far more than just security. They need an architecture that's built from the ground up around compliance. What specific mandates do these privacy regulations impose on companies collecting this kind of intimate visual data?
The primary mandate is the data minimization principle. This regulation strictly mandates that companies collect and store only the absolute minimum amount of information necessary for the stated, verifiable operating purpose.
So that means the computer vision systems operating inside the fridge have to be highly constrained in what they're even allowed to see and record.
Absolutely. The CV systems must be technologically constrained to avoid capturing what's called extraneous personal information. If the internal camera or the mobile upload inadvertently captures household clutter, or private documents on the countertop, or family members' faces,
That's a huge liability.
that is defined as unnecessary data collection, and it immediately establishes direct regulatory liability for the company. The design must be architected to minimize the risk of any accidental surveillance of non-food items.
And beyond just what's collected, there's the necessity for comprehensive accountability, which regulators mandate through the data inventory requirement.
Yes. Compliance requires a robust data inventory, which is also called data mapping, or records of processing activities. This is a massive administrative and technical undertaking. Companies have to meticulously map the entire data lifecycle, from ingestion all the way to deletion.
What are the functional requirements of that mapping? What do they have to track?
They need to identify every category of personal data captured. Is it raw images, inferred preferences, or timestamps? They have to document the specific technical sources. Was it the appliance API or a mobile app upload? They need the precise, verifiable legal purposes for use, like personalized recipe suggestion or retail fresh demand forecasting. And finally, they have to record the legal retention period for that data to ensure accurate and prompt deletion fulfillment when a user requests it, which is the right to be forgotten.
This sounds like a strategic nightmare, especially when you're dealing with high volume, high risk, raw visual data that's constantly flowing into the cloud. Is there a technological mitigation strategy that shifts where this high risk processing happens?
There is, and it's the midterm strategic imperative for the industry, developing and deploying edge computing computer vision models. The principle is simple. Process the raw visual data locally within the device itself, the smart fridge, or the mobile phone at the edge.
So the raw, high-risk, intimate images of my messy fridge contents would never actually leave my home network.
That is the direct strategic goal. Edge computing allows the raw image to be processed immediately, the data can be anonymized, the required inventory metrics detected, and then only the minimal, non-identifiable, aggregated inventory metadata gets transmitted to the cloud.
And that architectural shift, it significantly reduces privacy liability.
It does, because you are not moving high-risk, raw, personally identifiable information outside the user's firewall. It also mitigates network security vulnerabilities and lowers computational overhead.
You know, this deep dive really highlights that this entire industry, monetizing the fridge, is contingent not just on complex AI, but on a massive shift in strategic priorities, where compliance and consumer trust are seen as technical challenges that have to be solved.
Absolutely. The necessity of proprietary granular data is undeniable. It's the only way CPG brands can solve their long-standing consumption data gap. And despite the privacy concerns, we see that crowdsourcing is a viable and potentially more representative path to acquiring that data than relying solely on expensive smart hardware that generates biased data.
But the core takeaway, really, is that technology alone isn't enough to build a stable long-term industry. The success hinges on the governance architecture.
That is the critical point. Companies must treat data governance and consumer trust as core competitive assets, not as an afterthought. To directly counteract that perception of fridge keeping and surveillance, the strategic recommendation is to adopt policies like a Consumer Data Bill of Rights.
Giving users real control.
Yes, companies have to provide their panel participants with full, easily accessible controls over their data, including verified, user-friendly mechanisms for data deletion and purpose limitation. Failure to do that guarantees irreversible consumer trust erosion and catastrophic panel attrition, which would collapse the entire data asset.
It brings us full circle, doesn't it? Back to the very nature of the refrigerator itself. It started as a container, a technology that extended food's usable life, allowing for abundance and structuring our ethical conduct around reducing waste.
And as the sources describe, the modern refrigerator is ironically sometimes a coffin of decay, a place where food gets lost and forgotten before it's wasted. Technology is now attempting to transform it from a coffin of decay into an economic surveillance device to solve that very same moral problem of waste.
But here's the inherent ethical dilemma created by this high-tech solution that you, the listener, now need to consider. By solving the moral problem of household food waste through surveillance technology, are we inadvertently creating a new, deeper moral hazard around intimate data sharing and the constant algorithmic oversight of our domestic lives?
And more practically, if this data is so valuable to CPG, to retailers, and to health tech firms, who are we empowering with that highly sensitive knowledge about our bodies, our diets, and our homes?
It really seems the most valuable commodity stored in the fridge isn't the organic produce, but the data profile of the person who put it there.
proving that in the future, the global economy may truly be decided by the contents of your crisper drawer.